Well, we're here in Salt Lake City, Puddles and I. We managed to meet our good friend Bill Zehfuss here in Salt Lake City.
Welcome.
Bill was here visiting some friends, and we were here to visit Bill. But Bill and I go a long way back. Bill is the former principal trombonist of the Jackson, Mississippi Orchestra, and currently principal trombonist of the Charleston Symphony in Charleston,
Right.
South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And you also had interim positions with the Utah Symphony and the Honolulu Symphony.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And we also served on the faculty at the Brevard Music Center together.
Yes, for many years, and had a lot of great times up there.
And Bill used to study with Arnold Jacobs. Bill, I'm just wondering if you can recount for us on your initial studies with Jake, what you remember about those, why'd you go to him, all that kind of stuff.
Well, my initial meeting with Mr. Jacobs was on the phone. Actually, I had seen a concert. I'll digress for a second. I'd seen a CSO concert when I went up for my audition at Northwestern University. That was in February of 1980. And the repertoire on the program that day was the Mahler Fifth Symphony. So that was my first introduction to actually seeing Mr. Jacobs, hearing him play, and just being completely overwhelmed by the performance of the Chicago Symphony. The fact that those people could get together and just make that incredible sound was just life-changing for me. And especially being able to hear Mr. Zehuss begin the piece, and of course all the famous tuba and trombone parts just really made it special. So I decided at that point I definitely wanted to be a professional musician and wanted to study with Mr. Jacobs. And I called him once I got to Northwestern in the fall of 1980. And the most immediate impression I got was hearing his hello on the phone. That was just incredible, just to be able to hear that resonant voice and talk to him. I just didn't know what to say. It was really a very special moment. After a couple of attempts, as I know I'm aware that he didn't necessarily take students immediately, I talked to him a little bit about some individual challenges that I had playing, and he agreed to work with me and had me come down to his studio on South Michigan. And his first impression of me was the fact that I could completely cover his door from the outside, so no light would he couldn't see a shadow around the door. It was just me at my considerable height covering his doorway. So he thought that was rather funny, and we had a good laugh about that. And then we sat down, and he asked me about music, and we talked a little bit about breathing. And then he decided he wanted to measure my lung capacity. So he had a machine which was a bell in water, and you were actively blowing into a tube to have the bell float up on the water, and then he could judge, I guess, by the displacement what your lung capacity was. And once we did that, I started and blew the way he told me to, and he immediately told me to stop, that I was going to break the machine. So he said that my lung capacity was in excess at that point of 7 liters of air. That was all he was capable of measuring at that time. And, we got down to business working on our breathing.
I remember that story. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, so so you got down to business. What did you do? Do you remember what you played? What did he say? What direction did he take with you?
He looked at my oral cavity and made just some comments about, tongue and structure in here, just to get started a little bit. Always the key terms that he used was less is more. Always with the articulation, more breath, less tongue. And understanding that the air was what was creating the vibration of the lips, and getting that air moving was really important. He had me do a few isometric exercises, and also work with a breathing bag to work on making sure I was taking full inhalations. He used the analogy with the bow, and showing how if you're just taking very short strokes of the bow, it's not necessarily very good sound on a string instrument, but when you take the longer, much more relaxed strokes with the bow, you can get as much sound as you need and play the phrases that you want. So we primarily worked on some repertoire from the Bordoni Rochu, Also the Arbenz book, he was very much into that, and we'll hopefully get a chance to talk a little bit more about Arbenz and the importance of that later. And also we worked on some orchestral excerpts and solo repertoire.
So it sounds like, I'm just guessing, I don't know, but it sounds like, I mean, you had in excess of 7 liters.
Correct.
And yet he was working with you on the breathing aid, getting you to take in a full breath. That sounds like maybe you came in there not using your full capacity.
And that's correct. Yeah, he really was the person who had the light come on for me as far as maximizing my breath capacity and just having that awareness. You know, that in ensembles that I would have to shorten phrases because of the rest of the group to be able to breathe at the same time as the rest of the group. But in my practicing to extend phrases and make sure that I could, play with a resonant sound all the way through and getting used to spinning that sound out all the way on the air column.
Yeah, I remember watching him in a master class with another brass player who was large in stature as well, and underutilizing the capacity. There's all sorts of physiological problems that were introduced and are introduced when you just use less air. I mean, for you, using 3 or 4 liters of air when you were standing next to your colleagues in an ensemble or in a solo situation, that probably was, you got the job done. But then there were problems that were apparent, or you weren't able to achieve your very best. I'm assuming that's what he was thinking.
Exactly, and that was what was so inspiring to me, was that he, saw the complete package and wanted for me to be able to do my best. And I feel that his help was instrumental in having me progress as a musician. The types of performances that we were doing with the ensembles and everything. Again, in band, in brass quintet, those sorts of things, I would, of course, like I said, have to shorten phrases, but he would always say, be sure and take a full breath right at the lips, concentrate on maximizing the air, even if it was just for, a single 16th note within the bar or something like that, and really concentrate on that. So I've really tried to keep that in the forefront of my mind. Especially I notice as I get older, we're all getting older.
Puddles, don't believe that. You're timeless.
Yes, Puddles is timeless, but the rest of us have some challenges with the aging process. And yes, I have noticed that I have to be even more vigilant about taking in a full inhalation and exhalation, and making sure that I'm not playing on a less than half my capacity or whatever, and letting the extra tension creep in. That's can definitely hurt your sound.
Bill and I were housemates in Evanston while we were at Northwestern together, and so I remember, we would all be practicing in our rooms. This house had six and a half bedrooms in it, 3 stories in Evanston, and we all would practice in our own rooms. And so I remember, daily listening to you practice. And one of the things that Mr. Jacobs was working on you with you on was the development of your upper register. And I to this day I remain impressed at how you really took his advice and took the curriculum that he gave you and really made it your own. I wonder if you can describe for the viewers what did he tell you to do and that sort of stuff.
Well, thanks, Mike. This was a really transformative time for me. Of course, being around so many fine musicians in the house, and yourself and Neil Berenson, Mark Hughes, Ed Kuhn, Greg Flint,
Cheryl Hollinger.
Yeah, we had just an incredible collection of people in there. And Dan Satterwhite was even there for a short time. So we had a great time, absolutely. But Mr. Jacobs was very focused on, we talked a little bit about the breathing and making sure I was taking in full breaths, but also working on the upper register and just thinking of it as fast and slow vibrations. So as we got into the upper register, just the vibrations are moving faster, and really concentrating on keeping the air spinning and keeping the air moving all the time. So what we did a lot was take familiar material and transpose it. And this was a great opportunity for me to develop my transposition skills and clef reading and everything else. So taking that sort of thing, like a phrase from the Bordoni Rochu or an Arbin study, and then transposing it into different registers, but always with the idea of the sound being primary thing. One of my favorite times with Mr. Jacobs was demonstrating on my instrument, is that he would actually pick up the trombone. He had been a trombonist very early in his life. I believe the trombone was attached to the running boards of the car when they were on a tour of Arizona, and of course fell off the running boards during that tour sometime, I guess, in the late 20s. So he didn't finish his studies on the trombone. I guess came back, and his band director presented him with a sousaphone, and all of his impressive stories about that. But as far as the upper register went on the trombone, he would pick the instrument up and play the solo from Ravel's Bolero, and do some incredibly expressive, beautiful things with it. He always joked that he never learned the end of it, that he would just get down to the middle register section and then improvise a little bit, and then he would wrap it up. But it was always impressive to hear that demonstration. He also was very much into getting your brain exposed to as much music and great artistry as possible. So he would have me listen to Tommy Dorsey and great singers, all different types of music, to really have expressive qualities in every register of the instrument. We worked a bit on low register as well, and letting, as he would always famously say, letting the low teach the high how to sound. And mouthpiece buzzing was a very integral part of all of this. So it kind of was a combination, having great teaching, but also great influences like Mr. Gross here, getting to hear him practice on a daily basis, and so many of these other fine artists, and a great collection of folks in Evanston, was really tremendous. So I feel very fortunate that he helped me in this way, and I was able to progress.
I remember the transpositions, the transposition exercises, and certainly it would be a mixture of maybe more familiar tunes as well as more difficult ones, but always familiar.
Yes.
But what I remember also is there would be times when you'd be playing the trombone, and then you'd ascend and you'd start to sing, and then you'd descend and you'd start to play. Was that something that he told you to do?
Yes, that was something that we worked on. He wanted that singing quality all the time, and he also talked about things with the mouthpiece, and that you can be able to buzz it on the mouthpiece, you'll be able to play it on the instrument, those sorts of things. So yeah, all different sorts of studies. And one of the things I thought that Mr. Jacobs really offered, and it was unique to every person that studied with him, is that ability to introduce strangeness into whatever situation you were in. So he would take something like a mouthpiece rim on a handle and have you buzz that, and then immediately play on the instrument, working on the resonant quality of the sound and the clarity of the articulations, singing. And one of the things that I got a lot from him was his time as a vocal student at Curtis. He talked about the time playing the tuba and working with Dr. Reiner and all of the unique times there, but he also talked with me about the time as a vocal student, and I believe he was on to sing a solo role in one of the Stravinsky, was it King of Stars or
Star of the Night?
Star of the Night, okay.
Or something like that. Yeah.
All right. And
Stravinsky.
It was a Stravinsky cantata, and just some of the preparation and things that went on with that. And of course, he was a very famous commercial musician as well. His voice was featured on a lot of different radio commercials, and his bass playing was phenomenal in all different types of musical settings. So yeah, introducing that element of strangeness, I think, was really important to me and to all of his students.
So as we're discussing this, I'm remembering specifically you'd be practicing the Rhenish, and when you would go for the high E flat,
Mm-hmm.
high E flat, then you would start singing that, and then you'd start to play when you come down from the high E flat. And the reason that he told you to do that was to just to really get the sound of the high E flat,
Mhm.
in there, not just keep practicing
Right.
pushing. Was that? And correct me
Sure.
if I'm just elaborate on that.
Yeah, and again, he definitely could sense if somebody was, tending to lock up in their breathing apparatus and everything, because again, his line about that those certain muscles could only be used in I believe it was defecation and childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us had those sorts of things mentioned, and yeah, we would do studies where I'd continue to sing. Also buzzing, and then immediately going back to the instrument and playing it on there. One other thing that I thought was really tremendously powerful was his ability to get you to use your imagination and immediately make an improvement in a lesson. Like he would say, play this like Zehuss would. And it wasn't necessarily always the most over the top piece of music, something like from Einheldenleben or the Mahler Fifth, but he would also have something very quiet like the Rhenish or something like that. He would use other trombonists, Mr. Dodson and Mr. Friedman, as examples, and get you to imagine that you're, them playing the part and those sorts of things, and that was really inspiring and helped me a lot.
Well, I remember that he would often say that imitation is a very powerful learning tool. So just getting us to sound like Bud or Jay or Mr. Crisafulli or
Absolutely.
even himself or somebody else, even just some other great artist. That was the key, was to imitate, and we could bypass so many of the physical difficulties we might be having just by thinking a great artist and then imitating that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that you mentioned Mr. Crisafulli as well, because he was my teacher at Northwestern, and he really did a lot for me as far as helping with relaxation and working on standard repertoire. We've got a lot of ground covered, and he was just very, very inspiring.
Bill, you were just mentioning studying with Mr. Crisafulli, who was an extremely well-known trombone teacher in his own right, and to study with both must have been really just an amazing experience. What were some of the similarities, maybe the crossover, and some of the different things you learned from each of them, from Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Crisafulli?
Well, that's a fascinating question, and I was definitely drawn to studying with both of them and got great sort of complementary teaching from both. With Mr. Crisafulli, of course, he was my primary teacher at Northwestern University. He was the one that was visited in February of 1980, went to his home, played my audition for him on a Sunday morning, and then went with him to the concert, which happened to be the Mahler Fifth Symphony. It was the week they were recording it with Maestro Abbado, yes. And so that was my first exposure to a live performance of the Chicago Symphony. So I got to see Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Kleinhammer, Mr. Crisafulli, Mr. Friedman, Mr. Zehuss, all of these folks performing together, right after a lesson. And, the decision was made. I really wanted to go to Northwestern. So when I began working with Mr. Crisafulli, his approach was extremely relaxed in a certain way, but very, very disciplined in other ways. Mostly he wanted you to bring in materials that either challenged you or sort of some bases. Things like the Bordoni Rochu were part of almost every lesson. Arbin's book, we worked on the Koprosh, clef studies, those sorts of things. But he always began the lessons playing with you, doing some, he would always say, play some of these, which were studies that he would make up at the time, or he would get out of the Kees Blocher book, a lot of lip slurs and articulation forms and drill forms to get you going and get you thinking, as an expressive musician. But that idea of imitation, which Mr. Jacobs worked on quite a bit, was very important. I necessarily wouldn't have Mr. Jacobs play in every lesson. I mean, he would at some times, But a lot of it was, imagining what the sound was like. With Mr. Crisafulli, you were actually making the sound with him, and he would sing with you constantly. That was another thing that was really a meaningful experience, was the fact that his, had this incredible voice, and he could sing the tuba mirum parts with you, the bass solo part, and constantly make up words to different songs. So that singing quality was through all of his playing, regardless of the type of music. So it was a really great sort of tag team to have both of them working with me, and also getting some of the specific regimentation from Mr. Kleinhammer. I did take some lessons with him, and he was an incredible contrast to the other two as far as the use of the tape recorder and use of a tape recorder at half speed. Very much into specific drill forms and exercises to make get the clarity in the articulation and get all the things working together. That was really important. So I feel very lucky to have gotten to work with them, and then the immediacy of being able to go down to orchestra hall and hear them play, hear them perform the pieces that you're studying, and actually do the types of fundamentals that you were working on was just incredibly inspiring. I'm sure this has probably been mentioned before, was painting a house. That if you start at the front of the house and you paint one side, then move to the next, and you're doing this slowly, meticulously, but really with with excellence in mind, by the time you get back to the front of the house, it probably needs more paint, and that's fine, but you just keep working all the way around and keep making it more and more beautiful all the time. One other piece of material that I wanted to thank you for introducing me to, and also Brian Fredrickson, is the book, the Arnold Jacobs Song and Wind book, which I read and have fortunately found recently. Yeah, there's Puddles, it's kind of obscuring him, but this is a great book, and it includes a picture in here that's very meaningful to me because it shows some of the mentors that I had growing up. This is page in the foreword. It's written by Dale Clevenger, but it's a picture of Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Zehuss, and Mr. Clevenger in 1985, all at top form with the Chicago Symphony, and just how much I enjoyed seeing this picture in the Parade magazine in the Chicago Tribune, and then it's been recreated here by Brian Fredrickson in the book Song and Wind. But really a fantastic read, and hopefully everybody has a copy of it.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Puddles says he likes your shirt.
Oh, thank you.
I kind of like it too.
Yeah. We had to wear the Aloha today. Of course, both of us have spent some time out in Honolulu, Hawaii, playing with the Honolulu Symphony. And it was I wanted to share the Aloha a little bit.
Oh, and we wanted to share with you a little bit of Autzen Stadium, Genuine University of Oregon beer stein with Autzen Stadium, where it never rains on Autzen during game days.
Oh, wow.
That's what they say. But with our thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill. Bill and I were housemates for several years, and
yes,
it's always a great pleasure to see you.
Always great to see you too, man. Thanks.
All right, buddy.
All right. Best of luck.
Puddle says thanks. And now back to you.